Welcome to the Art of Aperitif, happy hour conversations with artists to whet your creative appetite. I'm host Emily Vikra. Today's guest is Dan Neff. Dan is a glass artist and the founder of Lake Superior Art Glass Studio. At his studio, Dan and his team use a variety of glassblowing techniques to create unique and functional glass art pieces, from optical illusion marbles to custom stemware. Dan's work is imbued with the creativity of entrepreneurism and the beauty that comes from passionately pursuing craftsmanship. Welcome to the show, Dan. Want to start by introducing yourself? You can just talk with me or
should I look at the camera?
You can do whatever.
Okay.
Whatever.
Both, but okay. Yeah, sweet. So I'm Dan Neff, owner and artist here at Lake Superior Art Glass.
Awesome. I am so intrigued by the whole art of blowing glass, and I would love to know a little bit of the background of just like how you got into it. How did you study it? How do you get attracted to glass in the first place?
Yeah.
And then how do you pursue it?
Right. So I've got kind of a unique story in that I've learned almost all the ways that you can learn glass blowing, except for formal education.
Okay.
So the kind of glass blowing I specialize in is flame work, which is what we do in this studio, where we use torches to melt the glass. And there's only like 2 colleges in the country that teach how to do that. Historically, it's always been for scientific glassworking, so making coil condensers and vacuum chambers and all that scientific apparatus. And so up until 2019, there was no artistic flameworking degrees in the whole country. So back in 2003, when I started, I schmoozed my way into an apprenticeship because most people didn't want to train their competition back then.
Yeah. Okay.
And the internet wasn't really a wealth of knowledge the way it is today, obviously.
You can like YouTube teach yourself to blow glass.
Right. And so the guy said no the first time I asked him, and he offered a community ed class. I took that, waited till everyone left, hung out with him until midnight and convinced him I was a cool 17-year-old and he should teach me how to do it. And so we set up a very informal apprenticeship. He'd only been doing it for 3 years, so I didn't learn a ton from that apprenticeship, but it got me into it. I figured out where to get supplies, learned the basics, and then moved to Duluth in 2006 and went to UMD and taught myself from the internet and books and DVDs during that time. And then when I finished my degree, started blowing glass full-time and taking classes from other world-renowned artists. And that's what really stepped my skill level up to the next level, is that doing it full-time, learning the tricks of the trade from people who are, world-renowned for one technique. They've spent decades mastering this one style, and they're the best in the world at it. And so you learn from them, and it's like, oh, okay, those are the little nuanced tips and tricks to this technique that maybe I understood before, but I didn't know those little nuances.
Yeah.
And so that was a really good way to learn. And then, just a lot of full-time practice. And I haven't taken many classes since 2015, so it was mainly all from 2003 to 2015. But pretty much all the ways except for college.
Yeah. Well, what drew you to glass as a format to work in and express
it was really intrinsic, honestly. I mean, when I started, it was really, for me, it was almost more the entrepreneurial aspect of it more than the craft itself. The craft itself was really appealing because it was unique. I had never seen it done before. I didn't know anyone who had done it. And so that was appealing. But the main reason I did it is because in high school, I was making hemp necklaces and buying beads and pendants from a friend of mine who was an apprentice to this guy. And so it was partly like, hey, I'd like to be able to make my own just because that'd be cool. And B, if I make it myself, I don't have to pay someone else for it, And so
it was like making a vertical chain.
Totally, yeah. And that's kind of how I'd always been since I was little. Like, thinking back on it, I was like, I got a gumball machine when I was, 6 or 5, and thought that if I put it in the rec room, everyone in my family that walked past it would buy a gumball every time, and I'd make, tens of dollars off this gumball machine when I was 5 years old. And so I've always kind of had that entrepreneurial aspect of like, this is something I want to do. I love this thing. I love this concept. How can I, get paid to do it, or at least break even doing it? I had a recording studio in high school, and that was kind of the same principle. Like, I wanted to record my bands. I had friends in rock bands that wanted to record. And so, well, let's buy all the equipment, and they'll pay me to record them, and that'll pay for the equipment. So honestly, that was probably the initial draw. And then once I got into it, what I loved was that I had never thought of myself as an artist. I was a musician, but I couldn't draw to save my life. And so all of a sudden I had this medium that I understood and was halfway decent at, that I had never experienced before. And so that really appealed to me. And I was like, oh, wow, this is really creative. I'm not awful at it like I am at drawing, and I could get into this. And then in hindsight, looking back, I realized the other part of it that I liked that really drew me to it was the mastery of a craft. So my grandpa was a stonemason and a bricklayer, and I grew up working for him. And every summer he'd try to teach me how to lay brick. And he'd be like, yep, get the mortar on the trowel like this, you butter the block like that, set it on the wall, wiggle it into place, check it with the line. I'm like, yeah, I've seen you do it 1,000 times. Like, sure, no problem. And I get the mortar on the trowel like him, and I go to butter the brick, and I just muck it up. And you never want mortar on the face of a brick, so you have to then acid wash it afterwards. And he's like, what the hell are you doing? Do it like I showed you. And I was like, I told you how to do it. I was like, I tried, Grandpa, but you made it look so easy, and he'd been doing it forever. And so in hindsight, that's a big thing I love about glass, is that when you're good at it, you make it look so easy. And that's what I kept learning over and over from these masters I learned from. It's like, oh, all that makes sense. I saw your technique, I get it, and then I go to try it, and I'm like, yeah, I really suck at that. So I'm going to need, a couple more 1,000 hours before I can get this even halfway as good as these masters. And so that desire to master something and just make it look easy is something that's always appealed to me. Again, I didn't realize it at the time, but even with musicians, I see someone do an amazing guitar solo and I get the chills, because it's like, I know that's not easy. Like, I play guitar, I'm not that great at it, and I was never good at soloing, so it's like, wow, that person's really good at their craft. And so that's what I love about it.
There's something fascinating. I mean, there's something so appealing about a polished, beautiful end product, but it's even more compelling, I think, when you know the hours of effort and learning and things that go into it. I was just a supernumerary in the opera last weekend. Cool. So that's a non-speaking, non-singing part. Okay. Very small, but got to do and see all the behind the scenes things of the people doing the wigs and the makeup and the costume and the singers do so much practice, and even between solos, and they'd run off stage and be hitting their sinuses to get their voice back into the right place, and all that effort and years of practice that go into making that polished end product is so compelling.
Totally.
So cool.
Yep.
Well, tell me a little bit more about working with glass. How do you make things with glass?
Well, as you've probably gathered, lots of practice. Yeah. And the other part of it too, and this kind of ties into another reason I love it, is that it's reverse engineered. So you have to know what you want before you start. It's not like some other art forms where you can just take a canvas, start painting, and see what happens. Which in certain aspects of painting, you have to reverse engineer that. If you know you want this landscape, you have to put whatever color down first and that type of thing. But with glass, you really can't ad-lib it at all. You have to really know what you want. And sure, you can ad-lib it, but you can't have a goal and ad-lib it. It's going to be one or the other. Yeah. And so you reverse engineer it, what colors, how big, what techniques, get all your tools ready. Because for some of my most in-depth projects, they're 6 hours nonstop. I'm spinning that glass in a 5,000 degree flame, and so I have to have everything ready. And I joke that it's like surgery, because if it goes really well, maybe I'll get done in 5 hours. And
that makes sense.
If there's a couple complications on that scale, one complication usually adds 30 minutes. Okay. And so I've had pieces that should have taken 6 or 8 hours go for 12 hours. And you're committed. You either get it or it's a total failure. And
wow,
so
that's such a level of intensity and focus. That's really cool. And so the process of working with glass is you're starting with various raw glass and melting it.
Exactly.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? I kind of watched it a little bit, but describe it a little bit more.
Definitely. So the two studios differ a little bit. In Flameworks Studio here, we use rods of glass or tubes if we're going to blow it. If it's going to be a hollow piece. And then melt that in the flame, layer. It's mainly a layering and additive process. Okay. There's a little bit of subtractive steps depending on what technique you're doing, but for the most part, you're layering and adding and maybe blowing if it's hollow. In the hot shop, it's similar, except that we start with molten glass. So we start with the steel pipe, we get molten glass on the end of it, or maybe we'll throw a chunk of color on first and then start layering our clear glass. And then from there, it just really depends on what we're making, but it's always layering, doing your techniques, getting your patterns in there. And usually the patterns are set up pretty early on in the process, long before the piece gets to the final dimensions that it's going to be. And so that's something people oftentimes have a hard time wrapping their head around. They're like, wait, you didn't just paint this on the outside when it was done? And I was
you have to be able to visualize how it's going to like transform and be in there in the process.
And another part of the planning that is really unique is that two different directions, I guess, of this same concept. But when I'm making my marbles, which is really my specialty, are these contemporary marbles with illusions in them, I can't look to the inside when I'm making it. I'm holding it from that perspective. So my whole pattern that I'm setting up on the inside is all done by guesstimation, basically. Like I know what I want, I know some visual cues to look for, but I can't look inside of what'll be the focal point when it's done and see how it's turning out. So it's all just an estimated, educated guess and hope it goes according to plan. In the hot shop, or both studios too, the other aspect was the color. When the glass is hot, it's glowing, so you don't get a good read on the color. And so that's one thing that I don't think about it a lot because I know what colors I'm using and I know how they're going to turn out. But when we teach our classes, students are like, well, I can't tell how much of this orange I got in there, how much of this blue I got. And I was like, well, they glow different shades of orange, but, to their eye, they don't know what to look for. And so it's just this glowing glob of orange glass. It's going to be all different colors when it cools, but it's really hard to tell partway through if you've got the colors where you want them or enough of each color. And so again, a lot more planning.
Yeah, right. And it's, what an amazing skill to develop too, that like ability to visualize an end product while something is in process, right? You know what it's going to look like from the outside in at the end, but to be visualizing it from the inside out as you go, which also feels very entrepreneurial, right? Like that skill of like having a vision in mind, but having to parse it down into all the like little actions that are on the inside to make it blossom out.
Exactly.
It's really fascinating.
Yep.
What draws you to marbles? Is it just that like original bead and jewelry interest, or is there something about
kind of? Yeah, so I got into glass for the beads and pendants and stuff like that, which is not always everyone's initial draw to glass. With a lot of other art forms or things you can make that draw people in. But when I discovered marbles, I tried a few back, and I think the first one I made was maybe the first vortex marble with an illusion was 2006, I think. So it was actually my first YouTube video. It's disappeared. I don't know what account I made it on or anything, but I know it existed for a while. And in my first professional level class in 2008 was with a world-renowned marble maker who's known for his flowers in glass. And what that clued me into was how many techniques you could do, even though your form was the same every single time. And so as someone with ADHD, it can be really hard to know what to make when you could make anything. Every day you go into the studio and you're like, I could make anything. And now at this point in my career, I've got my product lines. I'm very methodical with everything. But back then, it was like, what should I make today? And it was kind of debilitating to make that decision and get started. And so I found with marbles, I've already reduced a lot of options by saying, okay, it's going to be a sphere of glass. And then the decisions are, what three-dimensional design can I do inside? What two-dimensional pattern can I do on the back? How big do I want it to be? And off, away you go. And so that's what I really like about it. And then just the intrinsic value of how optically illusioned or how unique that optical illusion is. Can I grab one really quick to show you?
Yeah, please do. Right? I do think there is something, like, there's a very interesting human draw to things that are spherical and do have optical illusions that make you, right? They, like, change your sense of time and place a little bit.
Right.
So that you really, like, pull yourself back out and you're like, what is my place in the universe?
Right. It kind of stops you in your tracks and you're like, okay, what's going on here? So, this is...
Because it looks like a cone when you look in there.
If you put it in the palm of your hand, that's the best way to view them. Because when your hand is there, you know your hand is there, but it's like, well, that goes a foot beyond my hand.
Yes, right? It looks like it's piercing right through.
Yeah.
And it does. It feels like you could just fall into it. I wonder if it's possible you could show this on the camera.
You get a little bit of an idea.
Oh, it's so cool.
And then that one I don't have a pattern on the backside just because when they get that big, I risk cracking the whole piece because to do the design on the back, it gets really cold while I'm doing that. But my little ones, I also do like a two-dimensional pattern on the back, and that's unique to the year I made it. So every year since 2009, I've picked a different pattern to do on the backs of my marbles for the whole year. They're more limited, more collectible. But also, because I'm a perfectionist and we can spend years refining the same pattern, it's like, okay, let's do this for a year, because I'm not going to stop doing my designs on the inside. But the ones on the back, it constantly challenges me every year to try something new, because I love refining things, and I'm fine not trying things new for years at a time, because, well, I shouldn't say nothing new, but tiny little changes in a process can yield massive results. So like, this is my standard, Twilight Zone vortex. And then this past winter, I started experimenting on how to make it look a little bit more geometric.
Wow, so cool.
So it's a super minor change in the process of me laying out that pattern, but it has a pretty big, impact on how it looks in the end. And so those are the changes I like to do, and refine those tiny little things. So the background pattern is a good chance for me to like really step out of my comfort zone, experiment with a bunch of new stuff, and then see what I can refine over the course of a year. So,
beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow, sounds very like Hall of Mirrors feel.
Yeah, exactly. So there's some of that background design. There we go.
Look at that. Very cool. It's interesting because these subjects have actually come up with a number of other people that I've talked to, both the idea of creativity through limitation, sort of, and creating how it's much easier to be creative when you give yourself some type of self-imposed structure to begin with, because there is that paralysis and that overwhelm that comes from like, the sky's the limit.
Right.
So, to be more creative, you have to give yourself some type of like limitation and focus.
Exactly.
But interestingly, with a number of different artists who do not work in glass, the subject of glass has come up. And the fact that it is like a liquid and a solid at the same time.
Yep.
How does that, talk a little bit more about working with something that you're working with it as a liquid, but you have to like transform it into a solid, or like think about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's another.
I'm so worried I'm going to drop and break these, by the way.
If you want. Just overload you with all of them. So yeah, basically what's really crazy about glass, like you mentioned, it's a liquid and a solid. Make sure I'm in the frame here. And what's cool right now is they're actually debating on making glass its own state of matter. We've had three states of matter for as long as any of us have been alive. And because glass is so unique, it's changed over the years. I don't know if you grew up learning this, I know I did, that glass is always in motion. The reason windows are wrinkly is because they're settling over time. It's not actually true. Yes, glass is always in motion, but it's moving so slowly, it's immeasurable in our lifespan. So those windows are wrinkly because they were made wrinkly. They were not done with traditional float glass techniques, which came about in I think like about the 60s or 70s. Those windows were actually more so hand blown, and they were spinning out big platters of glass. And inherently, the center and the outer rim are the thickest, and so when they cut the panes of glass from there, there would be a thick end and a thinner end, and it just made logical sense building-wise to put the thick end at the bottom. So anyway, a quick little detour about the science of glass and kind of how we're in this really unique point with a lot of things with technology these days, but glass is still evolving, and it's still at the forefront of so many technological advances, whether it's the Gorilla Glass on our phones or fiber optic cables. It's still at the forefront of what we're doing in a lot of ways for technology. So working with it as an art form, it's this challenging, kind of humbling, goddess, if you will, that's just like, if you have good skills and you treat it right and you take care of it the whole time you're working with it, it's going to turn out really nice. But if you're not quite skilled in one area, or you don't quite have that understanding of the medium, and you start forcing it, and it's not quite hot enough, or letting it get too cold in the process, it'll let you know real quick that it's not happy. It'll just crack, and usually if something cracks, it's done. Once in a while you can recover it. Usually if you try to recover it, though, there's going to be some flaw left in the piece from where that crack was. Even if it's no longer a crack and it's fully solid and not physically affected, there's still going to be a bubble or a blemish of some sort. So yeah, it's this really, really fickle mistress that's like, you learn the same lessons year after year, one of the things that I tell people is like for probably almost 15 years, the lesson I learned every year was get it hotter. And I was like, well, why didn't I just get it hotter last year? Yeah, right. And then I was like, oh, I didn't have as good as hand skills last year to control it when it was 20 degrees hotter. And this year I do. And so now I'm getting it hotter, it's working better. Next year I learned the same lesson over and over and over. I was like, this is crazy. And I think probably after about 15 years, I stopped learning that lesson because I was getting it as hot as you literally could. But
so it's time for a new lesson. It's like
Yeah.
metaphor for life, right? You're going to keep having to learn the same lesson over and over again in different ways and iterations until you get that one.
yeah,
And then life will hand you something else to learn.
right. And being methodical is super helpful with that. You know, as an artist, I'm not inherently good about like, taking notes or like documenting my process. I'm like, oh, cool, I figured this out, that works, I'll remember that. And then I don't make it again for 6 months, and I'm like, shoot, what was the trick I learned? You know?
That's so me too.
Yeah, so I've started about, 5 to 7 years ago taking notes on all my marble processes of like, here's how much clear glass to use for this size, here's how much dichroic sparkle glass to use, and kind of setting up recipes essentially of like, if I want this to be this in the end, here are the steps and the amount of each material I need, because I always think I'll remember and I don't.
Yeah. Okay, changing from marbles a little bit to like glassware and stemware, because you make cocktails and you love beautiful glassware. Can you talk a little bit about, because I've seen some beautiful glassware that you've designed, what goes into like designing something like a cocktail coupe or a beautiful glass, just so we can get that like deep appreciation for what goes into a glass that we're drinking out of?
Right. So there's a number of things. I would say one of the first things is just knowing what color application you want, because that has a huge effect on what you can and can't do with that glass. So for example, our Spectrum series stemless wine goblets, those just have some sprinkles of colored glass on the bottom. They're really simple, single color. They're quick, they're easy, and they blow out really nice, and they're easy to get consistent. Then on the opposite end of the spectrum are wave stemless wine goblets with like superior waves on them. Those have so many layers of color, and we're manipulating it by creating that wave. And the viscosity of different colors has a huge effect on blowing a hollow piece. Some colors are really soft and they like to, just move really quick and easy when they get hot, and others are really stiff. And so what we found is that we have to keep our wave goblets thicker to make the waves stay crisp, because blue is a soft color, and if we get the glasses as thin as we'd like them to be, we start actually getting really thin spots where the waves are, where the glass starts getting almost paper thin. It wants to spread out, and it wants to just flow, and if one thing is flowing faster, And so really knowing how that color application is going to affect the form of the vessel is super important. Beyond that, as far as crafting drinkware, it really just comes down to also your physical skill set and what you can and can't do. We really prefer not to do a lot of processes after we've blown the glass. So a lot of really nice, refined, hand-blown drinkware uses a process called hot popping, where you're basically blowing the vessel in the form you want, but leaving it taller than you want, letting it cool, and then you score the where you want the lip and put a little flame on it, and it pops the top off. So you get this really nice, perfect flat top with a thin wall. It's a great way to do it, but it's really time consuming, and it's not glass blowing. And all of us love the process of working with the molten glass. And I haven't met any glass blower yet who likes working with it when it's not hot more than working with it when it's hot. And so we finish all of our cups by hand, which leaves a little bit more room for error, because you're just hand doing that process. And so our lips are not always quite as perfect. They're a little thicker. And the trade-off with that as well, they're more durable, and they look a little more handmade, and we get to, spend more time blowing glass doing what we love versus these secondary processes.
Scoring glass,
Yeah, exactly. And same thing with grinding and polishing. And so I guess that's the other big thing that goes into a lot of our drinkware, is that we love our lips to be better, but none of us really want to spend a whole day hot popping lips and going through that process.
I mean, are different shapes of glassware and things like that all made as one piece if something has like a stem,
Mhm.
or is that like separate pieces that get assembled? I don't know.
Yes or yes.
Okay.
It depends on how it was done. There are some stemmed vessels that you can actually blow the form of, let's say it's a stemmed wine goblet, you blow the goblet form, and then you actually dip the tip of it back in the molten vat of glass and gather some more on the base, and then stretch that into your stem and flare it into your foot, or you gather again to get enough material for the foot. So in that case, there would be 3 separate pieces, but all kind of done hot. It's a little bit more traditional and more refined looking to have someone bring you a glob of hot glass. You dab it on the top, stretch it into the stem. Same process for the foot. And especially if there's multiple patterns in the stem, and like they're called folios, and you have little discs at transition points in stems. Those are all oftentimes all different pieces of glass brought over by an assistant that then get shaped on that original bubble. But yeah, traditionally they're all done in one shot. It's very rare that a stemware piece would have anything glued after the fact.
Yeah.
Because gluing is an option. I don't know if you've seen the Blown Away series on Netflix.
A little bit.
Yeah. That's one thing that they definitely don't cover in there, is how much time those artists spend grinding, polishing, and gluing their projects together. They make it seem like, oh, it goes in the annealer, and the next day it's in the gallery, and they're, critiquing it.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, there was at least one full day in between those two where they were grinding, polishing, gluing. Because for some things, you just can't assemble it hot. If it's a really big thing, or you just, there's definitely limitations where you just can't do something to a certain scale if it's one piece. And so that's where that gluing process comes in. But it's very rare that a goblet would ever have glued pieces together.
Okay. Yeah. So cool. I think one of the other cool things about glassworking, like you brought up Blown Away, and just seeing people working here too, is the teamwork that's often required, right? Where there's an artistic vision, there's something that's being made, but there's so much teamwork and communication, and like several people working together to make sure that it can be executed. But it is like surgery. It's very amazing.
Totally.
Do you train most of the people who work here yourself, or?
Partially, yeah. As we've grown, I've done less of all the training, but I still train everyone in the Flamework studio here. That's my specialty. That's what I've been doing it for 20 years. And our studio manager, Jake, he does all the hot shop training now. I trained him in when I hired him back in 2019. But yeah, I've kind of let him run the show and really just, take over and make that his baby that he trains folks in on. And so things have changed enough since then, where the way I used to teach classes up in the hot shop is not quite the same way we teach them anymore. And I know that if I went up there, I could easily still teach a class the way I used to teach it. But if someone had taken that class before, they'd be like, oh, well, why don't I get to do this or that? I'm like, I don't know how to let you do that, because I've never taught it that way before. So it's a good mix of me still training on the Flamework stuff, because that's my specialty, and some of our glass blowers have gotten degrees in it, because opposite of what I was mentioning before, where there's no colleges that really teach it, for the hot shop for soft glass working, there are universities all over the country that offer BFAs in glass blowing. So it's really cool to get people in with that experience of more formal education, and then be able to take them to the next level. Because a lot of times, those programs, you don't leave with a fantastic physical skill set. You learn a lot of the basics, and just like getting a BFA, it's a very well-rounded degree, but you're not going to be an expert cup maker when you come out of there, because you didn't spend 4 years just making cups.
Right. So much of it is just that hands-on. Doing it, getting the feel of things. I think about that there are so many things you can only learn as you get the feel of it.
Exactly.
And those like little nuanced.
I
think about it with pastry making personally.
Yeah, sure.
Like how butter is behaving, but.
Yeah, right. You start to pick up on those nuances and figure out, that's why those didn't turn out as fluffy, because the butter wasn't the right temperature or whatever it was.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So fascinating. I mean, it's just, it's such a cool medium to work with, and cool that it's like a changing field too.
Yeah.
All right, last question.
Okay.
I ask everybody, do you have any like creative practices or like, daily, weekly things that you do to help keep you motivated and creative and explore different ideas?
I was thinking about this morning. because I just had a feeling you might ask something along that line, and it pops into my head once in a while. But I think I read it in a book 15 years ago or so when I started blowing glass full time or around that time. And it was just about making systems for yourself to simplify your daily life so you can focus on what you need to do. And so every morning since probably 2007, I want to say, I've eaten the same breakfast. I have a smoothie and an egg sandwich, and I mean, that's so hearty that I'm good till 2 o'clock before I need lunch, and I don't have to think about what I'm going to make. Same thing with picking out outfits. They're just like, what I heard was like, have, one outfit with different colored shirts or whatever it is, so you don't have to spend a bunch of time thinking about it. And so those things have really helped me out. Again, as someone with ADHD, it can be hard to make decisions and should I wear this with that or that? It's just like, no, just grab, a shirt and some pants that look good and you're good, And so those kind of things have really helped. And also just being systematic. Once I started using a planner, game changer, because I've always got so many thoughts going through my head, whether it's a new idea, something I got to remember to tell one of my staff that needs to get done, all these different things that pop into my head at different points. And especially when I'm blowing glass, I can't really open up an app on my phone or whatever. I can usually spare a hand to scribble a note, and so that's why I still use a paper planner. Because it's really handy that way, and it's kind of like my little Bible that I carry around. I'm just like, all right, here's my to-do list, all that stuff. And I think it's something that a lot of artists struggle with, is just being organized and trying to get that organization dialed in so you can have a successful business as an artist. And those are, a few of the little things that I've done to help me focus on the business and the creative side of it and not get bogged down in external things.
I love that. Yeah, give yourself a frame so that you can be creative in the middle of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Any last words? Anything I missed that you want to talk about?
Let me think. Not off the top of my head. I think we kind of hit on everything that comes to mind when I think about these topics. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for chatting with me.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, stop this. I don't know if you'd be willing to just,
In oxygen. And that'll come out of this torch, combusting pretty much as hot as those two gases get. So it's about 4,700 degrees is the flame that I'll be using. And then you have good ventilation to take out the heat and also the carbon dioxide. There's not a lot of hazardous vapors that are produced in the process, but it's more about just replacing the air, because when you're combusting a pot of flame,
burning a lot of oxygen
out of the room. Yep, exactly. So, what should I make really quick? Let me see. Probably one of the coolest things to watch is an ornament. So let me see if I've got a piece of what we call scalloped tubing.
Okay.
And it's been stretched down. It came as a 5-foot rod of glass this diameter, 5 feet long. We stretch it down to these handles called points, so it's easier to spin and hold on to. And then this section here is what the ornament will be made from.
Okay.
So this flame's just warming it up slowly. This flame's about 1,700 degrees. That's just bringing the glass up in temperature a little more slowly so we don't risk cracking it from heating it too quickly. It's a super, super light touch with my right hand. It's just, my right hand is kind of keeping that piece of glass spinning at the same speed, but when it was hot and I was shaping it, this handle wasn't controlling anything on the left side of the heat. It makes a lot of sense when you hear it explained, but when you have the glass in your hands, especially if you're a beginner, you're like, my right hand's the better spinner. Why can't I use that to control it? Well, that flame kind of acts as a divider. So now the same thing, the right handle is useless, and I'm just keeping it spinning at the same speed. Kind of work this onto the same axis. That has a huge effect on how symmetrical this piece of glass will blow out. Just gently warm the glass. If I get it too liquid, A, it's a lot harder to control, and B, I'll actually start to lose the ridges and the patterns that is what I want to keep in this glass. So warming it nice and slow. It also helps get a more even heat base, because glass is very logical when you see it done and you have it explained in this kind of way, that obviously if there's a hot area, that's going to blow out faster and make your form asymmetric. But it's, a totally different thing to implement in practice. All right, here we go. All right, there's a nice little squatty bubble. Nice twist to it. And I'll start, now I pick a top and a bottom. I kind of look at the profile, figure out which side's going to stretch out a little bit better. I'll make the bottom first. Just going to heat up the handle down here, get it warm. Kind of get that last little wrinkle to hopefully kind of melt away. And we'll stretch it out. A nice tapered point, that'll be the bottom. And then on the top I'll be making the loop, but I need to collapse the tube so that I can have a solid piece of glass to work with. So I need to open up this end of the tube. This end's been closed, so when I blow into it I can pressurize it without the air just going through. But I don't want to seal it up entirely, so I have to open up this end. That's one of those tricks I learned from one of those world-renowned artists where my mind was just blown. I was like, I've been struggling to open up those ends of those skinny tubes for a decade, and I could have been doing this the whole time. You gotta be kidding me. So I gotta be pretty careful with my left hand because it's hot on both sides of where I'm holding it. If I shift my hand probably a ½ inch either direction, I'd get burned. So now I'm just collapsing down this tube in my right hand to create a nice little solid piece of glass on the top. And that's the material we'll use to make the loop.
Now, I can't believe you do this without gloves. Do you sometimes wear gloves?
Very seldom, but yes, sometimes I do.
But right, because you also need that careful touch.
Exactly.
That gloves would make hard, so.
Yep.
Wow.
And the glass is luckily an insulator as opposed to a conductor. So, like I was saying, ½ inch either direction of my left hand was hot, but because it's such a poor conductor, it's where I'm holding it was just fine. So now we'll make this loop. And the loop looks, pretty straightforward to make, but it's honestly one of the hardest things people have to learn. And most of the apprentices I've had end up saying, usually years later after, they no longer are apprenticing for me, they'll be like, boy, you were spot on with your loops. Like, I've seen so many good glass artists make beautiful pieces and just have horrible loops on it. And I'm like, yeah, the loop really kind of makes or breaks the piece. Like, if it doesn't look proportionate or...
Right, it ruins the lines.
Yeah, right. And so I really get on anyone I'm training about, here is the best way to make a loop and how it's going to turn out the best every time with minimal playing around with it to get it good. So that's pretty much the stopping point for today.
Amazing.
Because this ornament will get sealed completely right at about that skinny point there, but I need to let it cool down to room temperature.
Okay. What?
So that
Wasn't expecting that.
Gotta keep you on your toes. And the reason I have to let it cool to room temperature is because once you seal it up, you're creating a vacuum.
Yes.
That if you seal hot air in there, it wants to shrink and it wants to implode.
Yep,
so
and
there's a lot of stress on the glass. And so right now I'm just warming it up and evening out the heat in the whole piece so that it can air cool. This is one of the really cool things about Pyrex glass is that it was invented for laboratory wear because this German chemist was sick of his flasks and beakers exploding when he put a Bunsen underneath it. And so he, in 1891, came out with this type of glass. Pyrex is a brand name. It's actually called borosilicate, but no one knows what that means, so I call it Pyrex. But anyway, because this is thin and it's Pyrex, and I've evened out the heat in the whole piece now, I can let this I've got a little rack, I'll set it in to cool it, and it'll cool down to room temperature, shouldn't be any cracking issues, and then once it's room temp, then I'll melt it off here and seal it.
So cool. Oh my gosh. I just learned so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.